Good morning. I'm Rick Wiesenberg. I'm the District Attorney for Douglas County. With me here today, Douglas County Sheriff John Hanlon, Oregon State Police Lieutenant Doug Ladd, Myrtle Creek Chief of Police Don Brown, and Major Crimes Team Deputy District Attorney Shannon Sullivan. Our purpose this morning is to discuss the officer-involved shooting that occurred on Wednesday, October 12, 2011 at Northeast Oak Street in downtown Myrtle Creek. Immediately after the event, the Douglas County Major Crimes Team was activated. The Major Crimes Team, under the direction and supervision of Oregon State Police Lieutenant Doug Ladd and Oregon State Police Detective Annie Harris, conducted an immediate, thorough, and exhaustive investigation into the events that ultimately led to the shooting. Subsequently, on Thursday, October 20th, the Douglas County District Attorney's Office convened a grand jury to conduct its own investigation. The grand jury investigation was thorough and exhaustive. The grand jury heard sworn testimony on October 20th and October 21st from 15 eyewitnesses. After careful and thoughtful deliberation, the grand jury concluded that the use of deadly physical force by the officers involved was justified. On the afternoon of Tuesday, October 11th, 2011, Sherry Bocock contacted Myrtle Creek Police Officer Jonathan Brewster outside the Myrtle Creek Police Department to report that she was being harassed by John Bocock. Sherry Bocock reported that she and her husband of 28 years, John Bocock, had been separated for 2 or 3 months prior and had just signed that day divorce papers. She told John Bocock that she was now seeing someone else. John Bocock became verbally abusive. While she was speaking with the officer, John Bocock called her repeatedly on her cell phone. Sherry Bocock eventually requested that Officer Brewster contact John Bocock and advise him not to contact her in any manner except by leaving a message at her place of employment, Ye Old Art Shop, which is located on Northeast Oak Street in Myrtle Creek. Later that day, Officer Brewster called John Bocock at his home. John Bocock indicated that he believed Sherry Bocock was in a relationship with a Vince Litzel, a real estate agent at Village Realty, located at 145 South Main Street, located next to the Dairy Queen in downtown Myrtle Creek. John Bocock told Officer Brewster that he understood and that there would be no problems. Officer Brewster reported that John Bocock's demeanor was pleasant. Later in the day, Officer Brewster was contacted by Vince Litzel. Vince Litzel identified himself as a friend of Sherry Bocock and wanted police to know that John Bocock had a bad drinking problem and often drives around very intoxicated. Vince Litzel indicated that he was not concerned about his own personal safety, but he wanted the police to be aware of John Bocock's dangerous drinking and driving. Officer Brewster looked at a DMV photo of John Bocock so that he could recognize him if he saw him. Officer Brewster was aware that relationships involving separation and divorce can often become volatile. On October 12, 2011, Vince Litzel was at the Village Realty office along with several co-workers. At approximately 10:30 in the morning, Vince Litzel was able to see from his desk in Village Realty John Bocock drive his vehicle into the parking lot and park directly in front of Vince Litzel's vehicle, blocking it in. Vince Litzel watched as John Bocock got out of his vehicle, walked around the back entrance of the office, of the Realty office. As John Bocock is walking, his right hand is behind his back, concealing a .38 caliber revolver. As John Bocock is coming through the back entrance, Vince Litzel flees through the front entrance. John Bocock moves through the office chasing Vince Litzel. Vince Litzel takes cover behind John Bocock's vehicle. John Bocock fires through the window of the vehicle and hits Vince Litzel in the abdomen. Vince Litzel runs for his life in front of the office, past the Dairy Queen, and toward the park. John Bocock pursues him, continuing to fire his weapon at Vince Litzel. One round shatters the rear window and actually front windshield of a pickup truck that's parked in front of the Realty office. Another round strikes the Dairy Queen only feet from the drive-through window. Vince Litzel continues to flee into the park. John Bocock pursues, and at one point yelling out, "Did I hit you?" before he aims and fires again at Vince Litzel. Vince Litzel is able to escape and make his way back to the Village Realty office. John Bocock continues through the park and heads directly towards Northeast Oak Street and Ye Olde Art Shop, where he knows he can find Sherry Bocock at her work. Vince Litzel calls Sherry Bocock and warns her that John Bocock is coming for her. Both Officer Jonathan Brewster and Sergeant Chris Malik, separately on patrol, were dispatched to a report of a man being shot at Village Realty. Knowing Vince Litzel worked at Village Realty, Officer Brewster radioed John Bocock's information to warn other officers. While en route, Officer Brewster decided that tactically he would have a sound position and a better view of Village Realty from the higher ground of the parking lot between the Ace Hardware store and the post office that faces Ye Olde Art Shop and Northeast Oak Street and the park. As he arrived north on the sidewalk towards Ye Olde Art Shop, John Bocock has a pistol in his right hand. Officer Brewster immediately jumps out of his marked patrol vehicle and takes cover behind the trunk area. He draws his handgun and immediately begins yelling verbal commands at John Bocock to drop the gun. John Bocock responds with expletives, refuses to drop his gun, and turns and starts to head back in the direction of Village Realty, where he has already attempted to murder Vince Litzel. Fearing that John Bocock will return to Village Realty and shoot other innocent victims, Officer Brewster fires 4 rounds at John Bocock with his handgun. Because of the range, approximately 60 yards, none of the rounds strike John Bocock. However, John Bocock turns and advances on Officer Brewster. Officer Brewster again yells commands for John Bocock to drop the gun. "Drop the gun or I will shoot you." Again, John Bocock responds aggressively and with expletives. Once again, John Bocock walks north on Northeast Oak Street towards the Ye Olde Art Shop. By now, Myrtle Creek Police Chief Don Brown has arrived and is parked in the middle of Northeast Oak Street. Chief Brown takes a covered position behind his patrol car, armed with his duty rifle, and yells commands at John Bocock to drop the gun. Almost simultaneously, Sergeant Chris Malik arrives, parks his patrol car behind and to the right of Chief Brown's patrol car. Observing that John Bocock's attention was shifting between Chief Brown, who was in front of John Bocock, and Officer Brewster across the street, Sergeant Malik, at grave personal risk, moves down the sidewalk towards John Bocock and takes cover behind a vehicle a mere 20 feet away. Chief Brown and Officer Brewster continue to yell commands to John Bocock to drop the gun. John Bocock continues to respond aggressively, waving the gun. At one point, John Bocock says, "Expletive you, it's not even loaded." He opens the cylinder brief for a moment and drops something to the ground. He quickly handles the gun with both hands and snaps the cylinder shut. At this point, none of the officers know if there are rounds in the pistol or how many. John Bocock continues to respond in a very agitated, aggressive manner. Chief Brown observes that Sergeant Malik's position 20 feet from John Bocock and orders Sergeant Malik to taser John Bocock. Sergeant Malik holsters his weapon, gets his taser, and tases John Bocock. And while the taser hit John Bocock, it did not incapacitate him, probably because the Carhartt jacket that he was wearing dislodged the probe and broke the circuit. John Bocock remained on his feet, revolver in hand, attention now directed at Sergeant Malik, who was a mere 20 feet away. Sergeant Malik was able to dive for cover behind a parked car. Chief Brown and Officer Brewster continued to yell commands at John Bocock to drop the gun. John Bocock now focuses back on Chief Brown. John Bocock continues to yell aggressively, waving the gun around, and now brings the gun up and aimed in the direction of Chief Brown. Commands are again given to drop the gun. John Bocock responds by raising his revolver and aiming it at Chief Brown. Believing John Bocock was about to shoot Chief Brown, Officer Brewster and Sergeant Malik both fired their weapons at John Bocock. John Bocock fell where he stood. All three officers rushed to him. They kicked his .38 caliber revolver away. Both Sergeant Malik and Officer Brewster administered CPR to John Bocock until paramedics arrived. John Bocock was transported to Mercy Medical, where he was pronounced dead. Autopsy results revealed that John Bocock was hit by 3 rounds. While precise toxicology reports on John Bocock are still pending, eyewitness account suggests that he was, at a minimum, under the influence of alcohol. This was corroborated by evidence found in his vehicle and home. Also found in his home and at the scene were handwritten suicide notes, indicating his despair over the end of his marriage. These 3 officers, these 3 men, reacted with great skill, professionalism, and restraint. They did everything in their power to bring this situation to a peaceful resolution. It was not to be. I want to recognize Oregon State Police Detective Annie Harris and the entire Douglas County Major Crimes team for their precise, thorough, and complete investigation of this matter. I also want to thank and acknowledge the dedicated professionals in Sheriff Hanlon's 911 Dispatch Center who calmly, coolly, and courteously, amid the chaos, got our first responders to where they needed to be to protect the people of Douglas County. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sheriff Hanlon.